day 3, a team's going to draft him in order to come in and be a designated pass rusher. And that's going to be his role, especially on the short term. After that, it's can we add consistent consistent core strength? Can we add that power profile just in general? If he's able to add those things and continue to harness that pass rush upside, I think that that's ultimately what his role is going to be, especially early on in his career, which is why you see him a little bit lower in drafts. He's a one-trick pony, and one-trick ponies are not a bad thing. That means you're good at one thing, but the question is if he is good at enough things in order for him to be an every down player on the next level. I'm not sure we see that.
Yeah, I think also just in general for a guy like this who was super productive in college, this is an insanely deep edge class. So a guy like him is going to get pushed down. A guy like him is probably going to be a 5th round pick at the most, probably more likely 6th, 7th round pick, just throwing a loose projection out there. I was talking about this on a radio spot the other day. I've got like 18 graded guys that are a 4th round, 5th round grade or better right now. And Powell Ryland, I'm going to admit, I don't have like a total formalized grade because I've had to prioritize getting real notes and quality notes on all the other guys ahead of him. So it's just an insanely unique class that we're in this position that we have so many guys. It's so rare that we're in this spot where somebody like Powell Ryland might get drafted a little bit sooner when there ends up being a little bit more of a scarcity on early on day 3.
Well, and also I think another key point here is that it's a pretty dang good edge group too, right? So
Yeah.
ultimately, some good football players who might be a little bit more of those one-trick ponies are going to get pushed down the board a little bit. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It doesn't mean that they can't have a role in the NFL level. It's just the nature. Like it's the same thing with defensive tackle this year. You're going to be able to get a really good defensive tackle in like the 4th or 5th round that could potentially start pretty early on in his career because it's just such a deep defensive tackle and overall defensive line class. So not a shot at Antoine Powell Ryland. So that's it.
Wait, what is it? Is it?
Is it Powell Ryland?
Yeah, Powell Ryland.
Yeah, Powell Ryland. Okay. What
the guys with the hyphens in their names, I always do that too. I always butcher that because it's like you never, especially when the name is listed in the reverse on a roster or something like that. It's so freaking easy to mix them up. But yeah, Powell Ryland.
I don't usually mix them up. I like to be pretty consistent with that type of stuff. But yes, Powell Ryland, I think, is a player, again, role specific, scheme specific. That's another part that we didn't even talk about. This isn't a kid that you're going to say 4'3", hand in the dirt, go to town at 240 something pounds. Like this is a stand up kid. He's going to have to be in a 3-4 base. He's going to have to be he's going to have to be in a 4-man front where teams are okay with using lighter edge defenders just in general. So a little bit role and a little bit scheme specific is why he's not super high on boards in terms of where his ultimate value is going to lie in this class.
Again, anybody who's joining us on YouTube and wants to drop a question in, feel free to. We will get to all questions later on in the show after we're done with all the questions that were sent in ahead of time on Twitter. Next question, Ryan, let's jump to Camden Hall. At Camden Hall 26 asks, who is the biggest wild card in this draft? The guy no one can agree on. I'll throw one out already here. I got to go in. Jalen Walker, who we just did our scouting report on, I feel like nobody can agree on. I think the NFL, some NFL teams really like him, and he's very scheme specific. I think that there are some media members that really like him. And I think there's some people like me that get a little worried that think if this guy is pigeonholed by an uncreative defensive coordinator who tries to do the Hassan Reddick BS and just say, oh, no, you're not long enough and tall enough to play edge, even though you had all this edge production. You're only going to play will linebacker in our defense, and then he's going to stink at it because he doesn't have enough reps of playing just will linebacker, nor does he have the instincts developed to make the decisions to make consistent plays as just a will linebacker. So I think he is the one player who I think there is so much of a large pendulum of outcomes where he can either go top 10 or he could end up being the 20th or 25th overall pick because teams that don't have him specific to their scheme aren't going to value him as high.
Let me ask you a question, Joe. Let me paint a reality, a different reality. It's 2007. A lot of teams are still running base defense, and they want to draft Jalen Walker pretty dang high because they're going to put him at Sam linebacker and let him rush in some under fronts, for instance, right? Are you a lot more in on him at that point?
Yes.
Yeah. Because I think that's his role, right? Like, I think ideally, like, this is a old school Sam linebacker who's going to play on the line of scrimmage a good amount in different fronts. Like, I think that's what he ultimately is typically, or what we would want him ultimately to be. The problem is, to your point, is that teams are running so much sub at this point, right? They're putting 2 linebackers on the field at most at times. Is he a guy on base downs that you're willing to say, hey, that's your role? Or is he a guy that you just want to put on the edge all the time, like a Hassan Reddick? And that's kind of where I lean ultimately.
Yes.
I want him to rush off the edge more than I want him to play on the second level and read and react. Like, I don't think that is his game necessarily on the next level. I think that Hassan Reddick, that arc, right? Because we actually talked about it this week, like you said. Hassan Reddick was a pass rusher at Temple, an on-ball guy that they tried to make an off-ball guy at the Senior Bowl and then early in his NFL career. But then eventually they just kind of figured out, you know what he's really good at? Attacking, right? Getting downhill, a guy that's going to scream off the edge, a guy that's going to get after the quarterback, despite him being a lighter dude. That is his role in the NFL level, and I think that could be Jalen Walker's role as well. So I would be really interested to see how some NFL teams value him. Is he an edge player? Is he a linebacker? Is he a little of both? Do you want to ask him to do all those types of things? Like, I'm very in between on it because I kind of want him to have one role on the next level and to do it really well.
I saw on Twitter, somebody tweeted a very funny observation of like a certain edge rusher archetype that actually works if you're athletic enough. And it was talking about Brandon Graham when he retired, and it's the undersized pass rusher that just wants to kill you. It's who's got something to prove. And that's what Jalen Walker is. And I think that is where Jalen Walker is going to succeed, and he needs to work on using his hands more. I think you can ask him to drop and play in zone coverage just a little bit because he's a little bit more of a fluid athlete than your typical big, meaty, slow 3-4 outside linebacker. He needs to play though in that specific front. Like he's not a 4-3 defensive end. He's way too small to be a 4-3 defensive end. I wouldn't trust him to do that. If he's a 3-4 outside linebacker that limits the amount of teams that are going to take him. Who else would you throw into this bucket though? This question of guys that maybe are going to have that nobody can agree on.
I think there's 2 right off the bat. I think we recorded another episode this week also on Tetairoa McMillan, right? Where he's and it's literally, it's in the description of this show about Tetairoa McMillan based upon the pro day that he just had. And I know we had a more specific question to Tetairoa McMillan, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too quickly here, but he's a guy that I think some people view as a top 10 pick in this class. I think some others view him as a back end of round 1 or maybe even early day 2 type of wide receiver in this class. There's a lot of varying opinions on Tetairoa, and ultimately, I think the NFL kind of sees it more the latter there. I think they kind of see him as more of a late round or at least a mid to late first round type of wide receiver that's getting kind of pushed up in a class that doesn't have a ton of first round grades at the top. But then on the other side, I do think there's some dudes that are in love with him. And I get it, right? Like it's the biggest moments. It's the highlight reel plays. It's the contested catches. Like, it's exciting stuff. I get it. And it eye pops and you see highlight reels of like some of these fantastic, just spectacular catches. I totally get it. But I think it's also the same, Joe, and then we'll get back to Tetairoa later, is Walter Nolan from Ole Miss. I think he's another one that a lot of people are all over the place. I've seen people, I forget who it was, that had literally said that Walter Nolan should be in the conversation for the best overall player in this class. Okay.
Oh no.
I honestly forget. I have no problem throwing dudes under the bus, but like I forget who actually said that. But here's the point, Joe, that they're trying to make is that if you take the 10 or 15 best plays of Walter Nolan and put it up against everybody in this class, you say that guy belongs in that conversation, right? And I agree with that in a vacuum. The problem is that there's not just 10 defensive plays in a football game. There's 70 plus, right? And that's the issue.
Which he doesn't give effort for those 70 plus. Like that's the whole problem with him. And when we posted that scouting report, like I thought that we were pretty fair to him, which was talking about he's got a ton of potential. But the problem is that his floor is so low. He looks disinterested. He looks unmotivated at times on plays. That's where the problem comes in. And, you know, we have sourcing that we're backing this up that indicates that some teams are really worried about his commitment and his focus. I keep throwing this out as a comparison for him. which is not direct, but like Robert Nkemdiche was insanely talented at Ole Miss. And there was this thought that, wow, if this kid goes on to play to his potential, he's one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. They don't play similarly, but it's the same thing in the hype and the school. He goes to the NFL and his career was so short-lived because he didn't care. And that was what I'm not saying that Walter Nolan is exactly like Robert Nkemdiche, that he's unmotivated, but from what you hear, he's just not super locked in, and it shows up on film, which kind of helps us understand that. And I think talking to the volatility of his draft projection, you're right. Some people see the highs and get excited and think this could be an elite, crazy good defensive lineman in the NFL, which is so true. But the problem is, and when we hear from NFL teams that tell us that this guy's not super locked in, that is what makes us feel, okay, we would much rather take him somewhere on day 2 rather than take the risk of him being a first-round pick. I really don't think he's going to be a first-round pick at all. Like, forget my projection on grading him. I don't think that the NFL values him as a first-round pick.
I have seen a lot of clamor for the San Francisco 49ers at number 11 to take Walter Nolan, for instance. I would be very surprised if he was drafted that early. I would not be shocked if he's a late first rounder. I think that that's possible. But I agree with you that I think that there's a big possibility that Walter Nolan could end up being an early second round selection based upon the fact that a second round gamble is an easier gamble to make than planting a flag on a guy in a first round that you have some question marks as far as his pure character and being locked into being a great football player. There's a lot of question marks there. You know what I think has started this conversation though, Joe, which is interesting. I think most people have Mason Graham as DT1, a vast majority of people. The DT2 conversation though is super interesting, right? Because you could argue for Kenneth Grant. You could argue for Derek Harmon. Some people would argue for Walter Nolan. Like there's a lot of different guys that kind of are in a little bit of that DT2 conversation, which is why I think that so many people have clamored for a Walter Nolan and the highs that he brings to the table, which is interesting.
I think the answer, no matter what, is Kenneth Grant. Kenneth Grant is that DT2. I'll get to talking about Tetairoa McMillan later because we do have a question on that, and I want to save expanding on those thoughts. Anyone who's on YouTube, drop us a comment. We will get to those questions a little bit later on. We can't throw questions up on the board currently, but Finn's Faithful Podcast said, "Sup, fellas, great show. Appreciate you tuning in." Anyone who is in on YouTube, please hit that like button and also interact in the comments as well. All right, next question.
And we'll be here every single Wednesday, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you know that when we're going live, even though I'm telling you right now it's noon Eastern time every Wednesday.
All right, next question that we have from Camden Hall, another question from him. Which running back could be the next running back who doesn't get drafted high but becomes elite? I stand by Kyle Monungai. I know that you and I were talking about this a little bit. I was at the Rutgers
thing
Pro
said
Day.
Who gets drafted, Joe? So, I mean,
he's gonna get drafted. Dude, there was every single NFL team was at the Rutgers Pro Day. They weren't there for Holland Pierce, who literally didn't do anything. There were 45 team personnel there.
Longerbeam? Are we not going to?
Okay, Longerbeam's a good player, but we know what they were there for. We know that they were there for Kyle Monungai, and they were all super locked in. When I was there, the minute that Monungai started doing receiving drills, he didn't do any other athletic testing, but the minute that he started doing receiving drills, that was when everybody's attention shifted. So I think he still gets drafted. He showed really natural catching ability, by the way, at his pro day, but I really think he screams to me Bucky Irving, Kyron Williams, not being a great athletic tester. People are going to call into question, but because he blocks his ass off, he's going to get on the field early. And when he gets on the field, that's when he starts to get some carries, starts to get some receptions. He runs hard as all hell, and then he's going to get a couple of nice big plays, and then he gets more and more opportunities.
Yeah. Kyle's good, man. He's a good player. He's a good, solid football player. He's a good, solid. You know what I think about Kyle Monungai? This is truthful, Joe. I think Kyle Monungai is going to end up being just a good depth piece to a running back room and play a lot of special teams, like a core teamer. That's what I see with Kyle Monungai. And he'll block his butt off, right? Like he'll do all those types of things, which is great. He has a rosterable outlook in the NFL. But the real answer here is DJ Giddens from Kansas State. That is the answer here.
But do you think he's
Joseph.
going to go late though? Like I feel like he's at the
It said
top of
later. Didn't it say later? It said later was the phrasing of the
our
question, I believe.
doesn't get drafted high, but becomes elite.
Well,
so I would say anyone beyond day 3 is that question.
Behind day 2.
Because he's going to be
beyond day 2.
Sorry, day 3 or
yes.
beyond.
Yeah.
Day 3, somewhere on day 3. I would not count Giddens, especially because you and I are smart enough to. Giddens is going to be a top 6 running back drafted in this class, right? Are we crazy there?
Probably, but would it also be shocking if someone, because he's not a great pass protector and he had some dropsies this year, that they say we're going to draft him in the 4th round comparative to a top 100 pick? I mean, would that shock you? I don't. All right, if I can't use DJ Giddens though, I'll scrap DJ Giddens. I'll take him off the board, Joe. I'll take him off the board.
Okay, yeah, give me a more creative answer.
Devin Neal from Kansas. Is that
Devin Neal's a good one? Yeah, that's a good one.
Right? He is. So he weighed in at 220 at the Senior Bowl. He weighed in at 213 pounds at the Combine because he wanted to run a little faster, obviously. I don't think he is the most impressive athlete of all time. But what I think about Devin Neal is he has incredible vision. Like, he sees the field at such a high level. And I think that he will, at worst, be a good, stable back at the NFL level. But if he lands in the right situation, could he have a Elijah Mitchell early end of his career? Could he have an Alfred Morris early end of his career? I wouldn't be shocked about that, man. He's one of the cleaner runners in this class. He runs with good contact balance. He runs with good vision. He's not explosive. He's not exciting. But I do think that Devin Neal could end up being a good value in this class somewhere in the, I mean, what do we think? 4th, 5th round? Somewhere in that ballpark right now?
Devin Neal feels like a guy because he's not like super juiced up and big and like crazy athletic testing numbers, long speed wise, that he does sometimes feel like he gets forgotten about in these discussions for top running backs, but his vision's so good that I think it's going to create a chance for him to get on the field early and to get early touches and then go on to have like a really good rookie year. I think we had a similar question from Brian Mafia. So let's just kind of pack these together. We had a similar question from Brian. Which late day 3 running back do you think is capable of breaking 1,000 yards as a rookie? Just to add in anyone else into the mix. Devin Neal definitely fits that for me. Is there anyone else that you think? The tough thing for this is we need to know a guy who's in a good situation, like a team that doesn't have a deep running back room and could end up turning to someone. Tyrone Tracy was a really good example this year where he goes late. He was a bit of a draft darling by the media, and he ended up on a team that didn't really have a good starting running back. So he started to earn more touches and started to play really well on a bad team. So we need to kind of think that is going to change things. But before knowing where people get drafted, is there anyone else you throw in there?
I don't know if I would quite say 1,000 yards to that question, Brian, but here's a guy that I think is a potential late round drafted player, or might even go priority free agent. Like, we'll see. This is my deep pool, Joe, and I mentioned this deep pool in the preseason, and we didn't get to talk about this guy much because he only played one game because he was deemed ineligible, and that's Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, who played at Arizona this past year, but was formerly at New Mexico. Do you remember him?
I do. I remember you wouldn't shut up about him. Why was he deemed ineligible?
Something with like transfer eligibility. I forget what it was. I don't even know. Okay. He only played in one game though, but that one game he played for Arizona, he went for over 100 yards on like 13 carries or something like that, right? So this kid is shorter, compact, but explosive. I really like Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. And funny enough, he went to the East-West show and he was deemed a big winner by like basically everybody that was out there. Like, this kid has some juice. This kid has potential. It would not be shocked at all if he sneaks out and is somehow a 6th or 7th round pick despite only playing one game this year. And he is a part of a stable. So I'm not going to predict 1,000 yards, but if I do predict value at the back end of the draft as a running back, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Arizona, transfer from New Mexico.
Yeah, that would be a hell of a deep pull if he ended up having production and he ended up sticking around. He's an interesting one, though, for what you just said, where he didn't even play this year. I almost completely forgot about him because he just didn't have any production for.
Hey, man, he averaged 100 yards a carry this year. I mean, 100 yards a game this year. I don't know what you're talking about, dude.
But he had one game.
That's fine. That's cool.
All right, we're going to get to the next question, folks. Remember, if you're tuning in on YouTube, drop a comment. We'll get to those YouTube comments later, and hit the like button if you are tapped in. Next question that we have, one more from Camden Hall. Which GM is most likely to make an aggressive move up the board? I think actually the first thing that I thought of was Joe Shane, but now that I think about it, I think because of how the Titans and the Browns might have completely boxed them out because they seem like they're trending towards wanting to take a quarterback, that they're no longer the answer. But the Giants and Joe Shane are the easiest one to bring up because they're so freaking desperate. They need to get a quarterback this year. If they don't get a quarterback, they have nothing that they can produce this season on the field that is going to buy them more time. If you get a rookie, you could buy yourself some time. If you're Shane, maybe not Dayball, but if you're Joe Shane, if you have Shador Sanders and he does some nice things, you can get a little bit of an extra cushion. We just saw Ryan Poles do this. Outside of that, though, I'm trying to think if there's like a team that's in a really bad situation that needs to move up.
Right. Here's one, and I think you're going to completely disagree with it, but I'm going to take a little bit of a shot in the dark because I think the Giants are the perfect one because, like you said, they need to try to sell future somehow, right? And if you get a rookie quarterback, you can at least sell future if you just increase your win total a couple and you're like, okay, this is trending in the right direction. Like the Giants are an easy one, although I don't know how much, like if the Tennessee Titans were not infatuated with Cam Ward and they were like, okay, you want to come up for Cam Ward, that's fine. We'll drop back a couple slots. They would obviously rather do that deal with someone a little bit further back in the draft. But the problem is that we saw the Raiders obviously make the Geno trade. We see the Jets sign Justin Fields, although for only a 2-year, $40 million deal. It's not a huge one. But that's actually my answer, Joe. The New York Jets are an interesting one because although they have signed Justin Fields to that 2-year deal, I would argue that is such a low investment from a quarterback perspective, only $20 million a year and not a ton of dead cap after the first season, that they would be an interesting one that would want to trade up for a quarterback, let Justin Fields be the bridge for that said quarterback for about a half a season or maybe even a full season, and then you go Cam Ward in 2026. So I think that the Jets, although they have their short-term answer, I would not be opposed to them going after a quarterback early in the first round just because they have a low investment into the quarterback that is going to be their starter in 2025.
That's an interesting way to look at it. And I think that first-year general managers could be more aggressive than people realize. I think that if you sit on your heels and you just kind of wait as a first-year GM, it's not how you produce success. You need to be willing to go after positions of need in order to start to cultivate winning in your first year and start to build momentum. I also thought of like the Chicago Bears, maybe. And I don't know who they'd particularly like be truly
Chicago
eyeing
Bears.
that they'd want to move up, but like,
oh, not for a quarterback though, is what you're saying.
not for a quarterback. We're just talking about like be aggressive. No. Just like be aggressive.
Do you know the last time? Here's a weird stat though. Before you finish, we've seen trades up in the top 10. Obviously, do you know the last time that a team traded up to the number 1 overall pick for a non-quarterback was?
When was that?
Orlando Pace in the 90s, which is a pretty wild stat to think about. The last time was an offensive tackle in the 90s. So we have not seen a team trade up to number 1 for a non-quarterback in about 30 years, which is pretty wild to think about.
Well, there's no offensive lineman that anyone's going to be doing that for this year.
Membaugh, baby. Armin
Membaugh. No comment. He's a good player. He's not the top 10 prospect worthy, but maybe the Bears get swindled into thinking that somebody that they love, whether it's one of the pass rushers, maybe it is Ashton Jeanty, maybe it is one of the offensive linemen. If they really wanted to get one more offensive lineman, whatever it might be, maybe there's a shot that they could be motivated to trade up. The easiest ones to turn to are these GMs that are in these situations where they need to produce success now and they need to win now.
Can I give one more? I think they picked number 15, but the Atlanta Falcons have a desperate need for pass rushers. Let's say that an offensive tackle does go in the top 4 to 5 picks, right? And we get 2 quarterbacks and Travis Hunter. If Abdul Carter's sitting there at 5 or 6, let's say in a hypothetical, would it be crazy for the Falcons to jump up 9 to 10 selections and try to get the best pass rusher in the draft?
No.
Like, that would be an interesting one for me because you have your quarterback, you have some offensive weapons, you have some semblance of a future there. Pass rush, obviously, I mean, they need pass rushers at a desperate rate at this point.
And maybe like a way more vague way of approaching that. If Abdul Carter does slide a little bit, I feel like that absolutely would create a trade-up situation. Somebody who loves Abdul Carter is going to freak out and is going to go, oh my God, how did he make it to pick 7? We need to go up and get him. I love the idea of the Falcons because they have needed a pass rush in the worst way for, it feels like, over a decade. It's comical how they have not been able to produce any ounce of a pass rush in a long time now. Let's jump to next question, number
Fellas,
9.
before Joe reads the next question, make sure
Okay.
if you're listening to us live on Twitter right now on my X feed, go over to YouTube right now. All you have to push in is A to Z Sports Film Room and come join us live if you want to join the conversation a little bit more easily, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Well, in a more engaged way. The YouTube stream is a lot more entertaining. It's not really that much different, but hit the like button if you're on YouTube. If you are tuning in and if you've been enjoying the mailbag, and comment any questions that you have. We actually had one more question from Camden, who sent in a ton last night. Which rookie is most likely to win Rookie of the Year? So we would need an offensive and a defensive. Sure. This offensive class is so weak that it feels like I would throw down a bet on Cam Ward no matter where he ends up, because he's got the tools and the ability to make splash plays, because he's aggressive and he's willing to take risks, all that good stuff. I don't really see a receiver having a crazy enough season, or maybe Ashton Jeanty, maybe a Marion Hampton if he ends up in a situation with a good offensive line. It feels like, knowing that this award always goes to a quarterback, that the quarterback it would go to is Cam Ward.
The answer to both questions is Travis Hunter.
Stop it.
Offensive and defensive rookie of the year. Could you imagine if somehow he did that, where he won both offensive and defensive rookie of the year? That would be the most hilarious thing of all time. But my actual answer offensively is Ashton Jeanty. It is, because, like you said, Cam Ward has a chance to put up some gaudy numbers, but he also has a chance to make a lot of mistakes as a rookie, right? And then Shedeur Sanders, we'll see where he lands, but he might land in a pretty non-advantageous situation, for the lack of a better term. I do think Marion Hampton's an interesting one, or maybe a couple day 2 running backs that could be in the conversation based upon the best fit, but I will go with Ashton Jeanty as the all-around, all-purpose back. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if he runs for 1,200 plus as a rookie and has 40 to 50 receptions. I think he has that type of bell cow upside on the next level.
Defensively, yeah, we gotta remind ourselves that a lot of times the defensive rookie of the year, this is gonna be a hard one, because there's just so many good defensive players. It's got to be somebody who's got a higher floor and a ready now impact ability. If Abdul Carter's foot injury thing isn't a problem, I'm going to go with Abdul Carter. Who is somebody maybe in the top 10 that could go in the top 10 to a team that would be competing for a playoff? I know that's a little bit of a complicated question. Travis Hunter's an easy one to throw out there, because his name is just so easily recognized that if he does some nice things and he makes a couple of big highlights, that he's going to very easily make it to the top of most voters' ballots that didn't even watch him play, because they're not going to say he ends up on the Patriots. They're probably not going to get a lot of primetime games.
Right.
Travis Hunter feels easy. Abdul Carter feels easy. Any of these other guys that need development, like Shamar Stewart or Michael Williams, I wouldn't put a vote down for.
My vote would go to Jahad Campbell as of today, because I think Jahad Campbell is going to go yeah, man, he's going to go relatively early in this class.
You've come around on Jahad Campbell, so you've had concerns about his instincts. You had concerns about his instincts, and you think that he'd be good enough as a rookie?
We are projecting NFL awards. I believe that Jahad Campbell is going to go in the top first half of the first round, which means he's going to be a starting linebacker, and he's a very rangy, athletic dude, so he's going to have a lot of stats and production. Production does not always mean good. Production just means that you were on the field and you were able to make some plays, right? So we've seen plenty of linebackers, Joe, that had gaudy stat numbers that when you really dissected the actual play wasn't very good. And I do think there's going to be some struggles for Jahad Campbell, specifically as a rookie trying to acclimate to a NFL defense and the speed of the NFL, and the processing needs to take a step forward. But would I be shocked if he had a few sacks and he had an interception or two and he had 100+ tackles because he played a ton of snaps? I would not. And a lot of linebackers have won this award, man, historically. It's been pass rushers or it's been linebackers for the most part, because those are the positions that are able to rack up a bunch of production. You don't see a ton of defensive tackles win defensive rookie of the year a lot of times. You don't see a lot of corners.
Edge rusher, a corner.
Yeah. It's an edge rusher linebacker, or two that win it a lot. Like they win it a lot. So I am going to go with Jahad Campbell based upon the pure production. If he has over 100 tackles, a few sacks, I think that he has the potential to have a gaudy stat line in 2025 for a prospective team.
Anyone who is hopping on YouTube, drop a comment. We do have one question that was thrown out there from Alex. What are your guys' thoughts on Illinois wideout Pat Bryant? I know he was super productive at Illinois. I don't think he's going to be a highly drafted kid. I think he's draftable. He's a quality playmaker, probably going to be the back end of a receiving room. What do you think of Pat Bryant?
He's very smooth. He's very good at the line of scrimmage. He gets off a press well. He's got a long frame. He's really good on the near the sideline and really good at the catch point for the most part. He understands how to track the football down the sideline too. So he's really good, just kind of boundary receiver, and he's got that build to him. He's just not a very good athlete, right? Like that's the thing. He doesn't have great long speed. He's not going to separate with just general foot speed. But I do think that size, that body control, hand strength along the sideline is a really nice component to the game. It's limiting as far as like his overall upside that he's going to bring to the game, but I could see him sticking in a roster for several years because he just kind of does a little bit of the nuanced stuff. Again, at the line of scrimmage, he has good release packages. He varies his release packages. He's got good hands. He does well with his body control. All those things I think factor into him being a solid rotational player, potentially on the NFL level, but I don't think he quite has starter upside just because I think that he's a below average NFL athlete in several regards.
Yeah, he didn't really scream crazy dominant athlete to me.
Didn't he run like 4.6 at the combine? Right?
Yes,
like
that was what I was trying to check. Because there's so many damn numbers.
Maybe it was like 4.5 high. It might have been like 4.59 or something. But either way, he did not.
He ran a 4.61. Yeah, that kind of played to our expectations for him. Is like, hey, we didn't think he was going to be a crazy good tight. He had a nice vert. He had a 37.5-inch vertical, so pretty good jump for him. But likely he'll be a good special teamer. I think is where he'll end up.
In a group chat that I have that we kind of talk about prospects all day long, which you're not in because you just don't.
I'm not cool enough
too much.
I do.
You just don't like to talk ball, man. You just don't like to talk ball. But we talked about him, and that was the first thing I said after his early season rise. I was like, but my question was to the group was like, how fast do you think he is? Because that was the one thing where I'm like, I don't know if I see long speed, man. I don't know if I see a guy that's going to separate, because he is a vertically oriented player though, right? Like he's a high cut, longer framed guy that is going to have to win on that vertical plane a lot as a receiver. And that's fine. But the fact that you don't have great long speed, I think does limit your role in that capacity. You can still be that contested catch back shoulder guy, the guy that can win with his length down the field. But if you can't win vertically with speed, I think that does limit you as far as being that type of receiver.
All right. Next question.
Yep.
Let's get to from @Durst NFL Draft. Will we ever see a tight end eraser from Dion to Revis to Sauce? We have seen lockdown corners. How come we never really see either a tight end with bad hands or some other version of a tight end sized linebacker / safety who can replicate the size and movement skills of a Kelsey, Njoku, Bowers, etc.? Well, I think just naturally it's hard to find an athlete that's going to be able to have the size to go toe-to-toe with the strength of a tight end, but most have the speed to keep up with the tight end. The tight end erasers we talk about are the Jeremy Chins, the Derwin Jameses, the Kyle Hamiltons, where if they did get placed in a one-on-one situation or a contested situation, they'd be able to win. Nick Emmanwori is the guy who fits that description this year. There's nobody else. There's no other safeties that we could talk about that would truly fit that description. Maybe Malachi Starks, but Emmanwori has the physicality, the power, and the speed to go toe-to-toe with these freakishly athletic tight ends. I'd be willing to bet that he'd go on to be deployed in that role and be able to be deployed at a high level.
I do love the question from Durst. It kind of reminded me of, and it's obviously not the same situation as he was talking about a tight end's body type that is playing tight end, but just maybe isn't great on the offensive side of the ball that goes and plays defense. That's very interesting. But I did think for a second, do you remember Anthony Barr early on in his UCLA career, Joe? He was a running back turned edge rusher, right? Like that was an interesting just kind of switch that we saw positionally from that perspective. But I do think that overall, like that body type, it's just a little bit hard to roster him consistently, Durst, because we've talked about it in the past. Sam linebackers are just becoming such a rare niche role on the NFL level, with teams playing so much sub and not a ton of base anymore. But I do think that you're talking about those bigger body types for a tight end eraser. You mentioned Nick Emmanwori. I think that he makes a lot of sense, obviously, with the 6'3" plus 220 plus pound frame. Like, he makes a ton of sense in that regard. But I think Malachi Starks is the guy this year, even though he's not as big as Nick Emmanwori. He played mostly deep safety his first 2 years at Georgia, and then he played a lot of man this past year in the slot. And I do think that he can match up with those types of body types, despite him only being a little over, 6'1.5" or whatever he was, and right around 200 pounds. I do think that he can match up against several tight ends based on the physicality that he brings to the table. So, and the explosiveness, the change of direction. So if there was a guy that I would deem as a tight end eraser, it would probably be Emmanwori. But I do think a guy like a Malachi Starks can do a lot of that dirty work and a lot of those interesting aspects to the game. So very interesting player, Malachi Starks, because he can do a lot of different things for a potential defense.
Starks is a good one to go with too, because he's just so good in coverage, and I almost wonder if like he's best just overall suited to stick with and to cover slot receivers in some of these big slots. But as we know, a lot of teams will try to use their tight ends to win over the middle. So having something like Malachi Starks, who's so sticky in coverage, is great to have on your defense. That's why I've never really understood why there's been this tumble for Malachi Starks in draft projections. Some people even said that his testing numbers were bad, which is insane to me. He just didn't run like a crazy fast 40, which he didn't really look like he was going to be a sub 4.3 guy on film.
It was his vertical that was on his vertical was the one that was like, oh man, I wish that was better. Like, I think only had like a 31.5-inch vert or something like that. I was like, I thought he was more explosive than that. Like, that was the only puzzling one. Here's a little bit of a weird one. I'm not a big fan of Justin Barron from Syracuse, who's kind of their big overhang, but I mean, the kid's 6'3" plus. The kid is right around 230 pounds. I think that he could have a niche role potentially as like a late round player, a special teamer. But again, we're not talking about a guy that's going to play a ton on base downs. Like, he would have to be a niche type of player. So Justin Barron, a similar body type to what we're talking about to like a Nick Emmanwori, just not as explosive and not as exciting of a player.
Two questions that we had in the YouTube chat. One of them is really quick to answer. Alex, are you guys doing position ranking videos on the YouTube channel this year? Really enjoyed the videos last year and gave some great insight on late round players. So we are going to start dropping our position rankings either next week or the following week. We're going to do like a consensus style where we're going to combine my rankings and Ryan's rankings and have like a consensus grade for the players. And we'll probably do mostly top 10s or top 15s, depending on how deep certain position groups are. I'd lean towards us doing top 10s.
Wide receivers got to be like top 20 though, man. We got to get to like 20 deep in wide receivers. But.
No.
I mean, yes, it has to, Joe. That's such a deep position, man.
It'll be a 4-hour video.
Too.
Man. Top tier asks, Burden is dropping out of the first round. What are your guys' thoughts on the Titans taking him if he's there? If Luther Burden, if he falls out of the first round or he makes it to like pick 30, is one of those guys that is run to the podium, trade up, move to go draft him prospects. Because his production is maybe driving down his draft stock. He is good enough to be one of the best slot receivers in the NFL. Like we need to stop doing this. Let the NFL overthink this. Let some teams overthink it, and then let someone benefit from the stupidity of others and trade up and go and grab him. If the Titans want him, he is absolutely worth the pick.
So I don't know enough about some of the character stuff that's coming out about Luther Burden. Apparently some of like the talking heads in the industry have kind of hinted at that, Joe, as far as like there's some like, I guess, questionable character. I don't think it's anything criminal or anything from a legality issue with a Luther Burden, but like, I guess there's just some conversation about his personality, I guess. I don't know enough about that to comment on it. I truly don't. All I know is if you're telling me the Tennessee Titans can get Luther Burden at 35 after drafting Cam Ward potentially at number 1 overall, I think it's a great selection for a couple different reasons for this question, right? One, Luther Burden at 35 is a tremendous value as a football player. I see a lot of Golden Tate in his game. I see a lot of after catch upside. I think he's a lot more physical than his size would kind of lend on at the catch point. So I like Luther Burden a lot, at least as a high end number 2 on the NFL level. I think that he has that upside without question, could potentially be a low-end number one. I think that he is that type of football player. The other side of it, though, is if I'm breaking in a rookie quarterback, Joe, I want a guy that makes things easy for a rookie, right? And if it's Luther Burden, that means RPO game, that means screen game, that means short crossers, mesh routes, just get the ball in his hand and let him create some hidden yardage after the catch. That is a quarterback's best friend. We always talk about that with tight ends, but a short area wide receiver who can do the screen game, can do the RPO game is another best friend for a rookie quarterback especially. So I think that would be a slam dunk if he was there at 35 to the Tennessee Titans. Slam dunk.
Yeah, if he slides that far, he's going to end up being one of those picks that we're talking about. Like, why the hell did we let him land with X team? I almost think that these teams that are historically great drafters are going to see him on the board and scoop him up instead of a team like the Titans or a team like the Browns or just somebody that actually needs good production and that needs a prospect like that. I almost feel like, I'm not saying the Titans aren't smart, but there's plenty of those other teams in the top 10 that aren't smart to make that pick, that they'll completely screw it up. Anyone who's tapped in, though, please hit that like button if you're tuning in, and appreciate anyone who has sent comments on YouTube. But we're getting back to the Twitter questions. At 8chains07, Mike Green or James Pierce Jr. off the board first. Ryan, I feel like James Pierce Jr. is going to go off the board first because from what it seems like, the Mike Green Jr. stuff is a lot more concerning than James Pierce Jr. just not being as motivated as he could be.
Man, this is one of the toughest questions we've been asked all day because we're dealing with two players that are dealing with issues off the field, right? And one is answering questions about past incidents with Mike Green. Google it if you haven't Googled it before. Go ahead.
He has multiple sexual assault allegations, just to not beat around the bush.
Yes. Okay. James Pierce Jr., it's a character thing, right? There's people that question his work ethic and his drive and him want to be great. And honestly, when you parallel that with the jump he took from 2023 to 2024, he was still good in 2024, Joe, but I was expecting him after his 2023 season to take a jump and be in the conversation with Abdul Carter right now as the first defensive player off the board. I expected him to be that type of football player. Unfortunately, he didn't take that jump. He was still good again. Again, he was still good, but he wasn't amazing. He wasn't elite in 2024. He has those God-given gifts, though, that you just can't teach. I mean, there just are so many people on earth that are 6'5 plus or almost 250 pounds that run 4.47. Like, that's crazy, man. Crazy athletic traits. So if you gunned to my head today, if you said who's getting picked first, I would say James Pierce Jr., but I don't feel great about it, right? Like, I do not feel great about it, and I think I might get shot in the end. So I would be a little bit terrified about that pick. But I will pick James Pierce Jr., but it is not a James Pierce Jr. with an exclamation point. I do think there's some question there.
Just knowing how the NFL has reacted to guys that have concerning criminal histories, and Mike Green stuff is alleged, but when you dig into it deeper, it gets pretty concerning. I think that the NFL is not going to take him in the first round.
Even if teams have kind of wiped that slate clean and aren't worried about like those past allegations, it's not even the legality side of it, right? The fact that he did it or that he didn't do it, whatever, that it's out there. It's more important to see how he reacts to teams when they ask about it. And that was one thing that troubled me coming out of the combine, was I had heard from a couple of different teams that weren't overly excited about how those questions were ultimately answered. And that is I think the troubling part of this conversation is the fact that if you made a mistake in the past, everyone makes mistakes to varying levels. If you are redemptive and you are if you want to put some real emotion out there as far as like, I made a mistake, let's move forward. I want to make amends for my past mistakes. People can change. They 100% can change. But if he didn't answer those questions properly or in a honest manner, I just think that that's maybe even as big a question as if, I don't want to get down that rabbit hole, but that's also concerning.
All right, let's get to our next question. At Peter Quinn, 1997, I've mostly seen him projected as a center, but do you guys think Gray Zabel could be a solid enough guard at the NFL level? I actually think he's a better guard than he would be a center. I think he could play center. He snapped decently well at the Senior Bowl, but I'd rather let him have the momentum of being able to, play with his hand in the dirt and to be able to power forward and to scoop out guys on double teams. I think his physical play style, I want to play in guard. I would actually much rather have him as a guard than a center.
In the world of inside zone running, I would be okay with him playing either. Either way, he's going to have to contact to the point of attack. He's going to have to dig dudes out. Like, he's going to have to do that type of stuff. So I'm okay with either. I think generally speaking, though, I'm just glad because I know that there was an early conversation of like, are we leaving him at tackle? I think that conversation has obviously been dead. He's definitely an interior offensive.
No, yeah, he's not a tackle. He's not a tackle.
Just lacks length, and he's a good athlete on the interior, but he's not a good athlete for an offensive tackle on the next level. Like, there's a differentiation there. So I think that he could play either. I'm not committal to either spot potentially. I think that you draft him and you just see the best way to get your best 5 on the field. If that's him at guard, cool. If that's him at center, I'm also okay with it overall.
All right. We got from @Elks70. Why do people keep mocking Tyler Warren to my Colts? That's not even our biggest need. I know that there's defensive needs with the Colts. And we did in our mock draft, you pointed out that the Colts might be really interested in Jahad Campbell. The reason why Tyler Warren, who I don't even think is going to be on the board for the Colts, keeps getting mocked is because Anthony Richardson needs guys to dump the ball off to. He needs guys that also are going to block for him. And Tyler Warren's going to do both. He's going to do it better than Colson Loveland. He's going to be very well-rounded the minute that he steps in the NFL. You got to get the guy options. I think that they've invested enough picks at receiver that they wouldn't draft a receiver that early at where they're sitting in the top 15. But taking Tyler Warren, I think, absolutely takes that offense in the direction that it needs to. You need someone that is going to calm down AR, that he can just know, hey, he's across the middle of the field on this 5-yard route. I can just connect with him.
Well, and I think there's an interesting conversation about if Chris Ballard, the general manager for the Indianapolis Colts, is not able to figure it out with Anthony Richardson, then is that it for Chris Ballard in Indianapolis, right? Like, I think it could be potentially his last mistake if it ends up being a mistake. To answer Elk's question, though, this is the tight end room for Indianapolis, which is why that we keep talking about a tight end to them. Drew Ogletree, Jelani Woods, Will Mallory, Albert Akwegbunam, and Sean McKeon.
Mo Alley Cox isn't there anymore.
Mo Alley Cox is not there anymore. No, he's not. I guess we can move Anthony Richardson to tight end if all else fails.
Oh, stop it.
But tight end is a huge need for this team. We could debate on what is more of a big need, and I am sympathetic to those arguments, right? If you think it's in the secondary, right? Like, I know corner and safety could be a conversation point for them. There's other spots that I think make a little bit of sense. Maybe it's an edge rusher.
Now they need a guard because they lost, or a center because they lost Will Fries and Ryan Kelly. So their offensive line needs to get reworked.
Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing, Joe. Where do the Colts pick? Are they 14? They're number 14.
I believe they're 14. Yeah,
they're 14. Tyler Warren, I think, is a top 10 player in this draft, who might not end up being a top 10 player because he's a tight end, even though I think that the Jets might think about it at 7. We'll see, though. Either way, though, if you get a top 10 player in the draft at number 14, that's called value, right? Like, that's called value. And Tyler Warren, I think, transforms your passing game a little bit, even if it's not with Anthony Richardson long-term, because you have a couple really interesting wide receivers on this roster. You have Michael Pittman Jr., you have Josh Downs, you have Alec Pierce. There is interesting wide receivers on this team, but you don't have a guy that is big body, middle of the field dude. You have Josh Downs, who could work the middle of the field as a slot, but he's not a bigger body guy. He's a quick, explosive slot receiver. You need a guy that I think can affect the middle of the field with size and physicality, and that's what Tyler Warren brings to the table. And plus, he's an after-catch guy too. So if you want to talk about making things easier for a young quarterback, getting the ball to him off of slides and maybe even a screen occasionally to the tight end or a short drag, Tyler Warren can make a lot of things happen. So I would be totally fine with him being the Colts selection, at pick number 14.
Yeah, you need somebody because he struggles downfield a lot. A lot of his misses are these shots downfield that he can't hit. Finding somebody who's within in a closer radius that has a big frame is only going to make Anthony Richardson better.
All he does is throw the ball down the field, though, because he just wants to show off the arm all the time, man. Like,
and he doesn't do a very good job of it. At Bobo J78, why are former NFL scouts so often condescending D-bags? We're not gonna take any shots here, but I have noticed that there is just a general hubris because these people think that just because they were in a draft room for a period of time, that means that nobody else can learn how to watch film, or that other people weren't coaches, that they weren't players, that they weren't in meeting rooms with recruiting meeting rooms when they were playing, all of those things. A lot of people want to pretend that you can only learn about the draft from being a scout. So I just think it's a lot of these, the ones that are condescending are the ones that are oblivious and aren't paying attention to the world outside of themselves. Just keep it at that.
Right. Yeah. So here's the okay. So I think there's a superiority complex with some people, right? Like I was a scout, I know everything. Cool, whatever. That's fine. Experience does matter. It does matter. It doesn't always mean everything, but it does matter in certain instances. I agree. Okay. Here's the thing though. Really, we're only talking about one person in this conversation that attacked me on Twitter recently that was a former NFL scout. The other guy that I go back and forth with about being a former NFL scout wasn't actually a former NFL scout. So he doesn't actually fit into this criteria of this conversation. But I do think it's a superiority complex, Joe. And it's one of those things where in any profession, this is how I put it on Twitter, in any profession, there are people that are really good at their job and there are people that are bad at their job. Right? Not everybody that was a former NFL scout was a great former NFL scout or a great evaluator. There are some really bad ones. I've talked to some in the past, right? That are just not great evaluators. We have to segment that. And ultimately, there's different scenarios of why people aren't in the profession anymore. But usually when the word former is attached to your title, that usually
there's a reason why you haven't been rehired. There's a reason why you haven't been rehired, and it's usually because you're an asshole. Plain and simple.
Or you're not good. Or you're not good. Or you're not
good.
Both. Ultimately.
Or both. Or both things work. Both things typically work.
So, so just to end the conversation real quick.
Yes.
I don't care that so I invited the gentleman to have me on to a film room together. You can test my knowledge, right? Like I'm okay with you testing me if you don't know if I know ball, right? If you don't know that I'm a good evaluator, that's fine. We can test that. But don't come in at me when I have never had a conversation with you at all and just assume that you know X, Y, and Z. That is not called, is called being a bad human being, which is even worse than being a bad former NFL scout. The end.
In the same vein, we got another question at Emerson2992. Opinions on a content creator charging $100 for a film review and threatening him when he doesn't get his money. This is a class of 2027 kid being blackmailed. So this is referring to Rico Knows, who's this TikTok recruiting evaluator. That guy's an ass. He made a very inappropriate comment about the Vikings cornerback who passed away this summer. We don't need to spend a lot of time on this one. This did catch my attention because yesterday I was like, this guy sucks. Like, why? Any kid who feels duped into sending this guy money, feel so sorry for them. This guy's a grifter. He can't succeed or do anything else on his own. Anyone who's charging, content creators should only be charging people for consuming their content because they're providing something exclusive. Okay, whether it's an exclusive mailbag, you're doing a lot of work towards your Substack, any of those things. The minute that you're taking money away from a young aspiring recruit, that is when this gets grimy. If anyone ever asks you for money, if there's any recruits who are tuning into this, because I know that you and I have a large following of kids that are in high school that just want to learn more about playing and how to get their shots and all that stuff. I implore you guys, do not ever pay somebody for an evaluation unless it is for a camp at a Rivals camp, a 247 camp, or anything that is from a reputable location. Always check with other people before you communicate with somebody before they start or if they start asking for money.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the situation, so I'm glad you put a lot of context there. I would say, generally speaking, be a good person, right? Like, be a good person overall. But also on the other side,
we're not trying to coach up the content creators because we're trying to coach up the kids that, the guy's not getting screwed over.
Don't agree to pay someone money and then not pay them money, right? Like that's kind of a baseline, right? Like do your research. Don't give a guy money that you don't know if he has connections or if he can help you out in the process of growing your career. But I mean, overall, like that's just, it's an unfortunate situation that this stuff happens a lot. I don't really have a ton to add to it otherwise. It's kind of a shitty situation. So, yeah.
Last question we have before we get out of here. the one that was the leading conversation. What's more likely to happen? T-Mac wide receiver 2 off the board or Colston Loveland tight end 1 off the board? I think T-Mac wide receiver 2 off the board, meaning that somebody goes ahead of him.
I disagree. I disagree.
Really?
So much. I disagree.
Okay,
so much,
the reason why I think this is I believe the testing for Ted McMillan at his pro day calmed a lot of people's concerns. I don't think it changes anything for me because you're supposed to add on a hand time. There's no video of him running. You're supposed to add on a hand time 0.8 seconds to a 40 time. So he ran a 4.48, which 0.08, sorry. Yep. 0.08. He ran a 4.48, which means he ran a 4.56. He's 4.56 fast on film. You were hoping that he wasn't 4.6, which it wasn't. Which is fine number for him. The concern that we have is that he's a big receiver who doesn't win through press. He's also a big receiver who also doesn't create separation over the top very well. And he's also a big receiver who's an inconsistent route runner. I would much rather take a shot on a guy who doesn't solely rely on contested situations. I think that some teams might get excited enough by Matthew Golden running that 4.29 that maybe he ends up being wide receiver 1. I don't think the buzz for him is fake. I think it's real.
Right. So here's why I say I think that the tight end 1 conversation around Colston Loveland is more likely, because I do think that although the NFL might be a little bit lower on Tetairoa McMillan compared to what the media is, I don't think that he's going to be a top 10 pick ultimately, but I still think he's going to get drafted somewhere 10 to 20, right? Like somewhere in that range. I think he's going to be a teens potential guy. My question is, like, who's going to be drafted before him of a wide receiver? I think Matthew Golden is more than likely a late first, early second. Like, I don't think that he's a guy that could go in the teens. I don't think that Emeka Egbuka is going to be a guy that goes in the teens. I don't think Luther Burden right now is going to be a guy that goes in the teens. So the competition aspect from the testing perspective, which is very interesting, it's always this for me, Joe. We over-fixate on testing so much, and it creates a new reality in our minds. And not you and me, I'm saying specifically, I'm saying as a collective, we do this way too often. Here's the thing about Tetairoa McMillan. I watch Tetairoa McMillan, and I'm like, hey man, kid's got great hands, great body control, really good in contested catch situations, big body, obviously. Cool, that's great. He creates separation in that way. Do I see him create separation with foot speed? No. Do I think that he's going to create separation as a route runner consistently? No, at times, but not fully, right? Like not all the time. So I'm looking at a player that I consider to be a one-way separator, which again is fine, but I just wouldn't generally take that guy in the top 10, which is why I don't think that I don't think the NFL is going to take him in the top 10 either. But that being said, I still think that he's probably going to be wide receiver 1 just because I think that his range of outcomes is higher than the other wide receivers. Tight end wise,
it's fair.
We keep talking about Tyler Warren somewhere 7 to 14, and it's possible. But here's the thing, Joe: if Jets don't go on don't draft Tyler Warren, and the Colts don't draft Tyler Warren, right? If they don't draft Tyler Warren, there's a slide that's going to happen a little bit. And right now, today, I think that the Colts might take someone other than Tyler Warren, right? So if he gets past the Colts, then we're talking more in like the Los Angeles Chargers conversation, Denver Broncos conversation, potentially of a tight end, even though they just drafted Evan Ingram. And at that point, it's about your flavor, right? Like, do you want the big body, physical, more all-around tight end in Tyler Warren, or do you want the route runner, right, of a Colston Loveland, maybe a little bit more of a smoother type of athlete comparative to explosive type of athlete? I think that conversation could be interesting. I still think Tyler Warren is the first tight end off the board, but if you're asking me which one is more likely, I do think that there are some teams around the NFL that will value Colston Loveland slightly higher than Tyler Warren, right or wrong, which is why it leads me to that scenario.
For context, which is kind of funny, I have Colston Loveland as tight end 1. So which
is hilarious, dude. And some NFL teams do as well. Like I
just think he is. But like, I'm not a team. I'm not an NFL team. I'm making my evaluation of my decision based on the fact that he is a smooth, long athlete. He is a guy who is going to pick up speed in a hurry. And a team that wants to stretch the field with a tight end, they're going to take Colston Loveland. I see what you mean, though. I think that it's a very interesting question. It's a very, very interesting one. I'm curious to see how, if there's any team that's in love with Tetairoa McMillan, maybe changes their opinion on him. That was all the questions that we had, Ryan. We're going to be live going forward up until the draft. Maybe after the draft, we'll still go live, but that's to be determined. Noon every single Wednesday. at Rising Draft, at Joe DeLeone. We will solicit for questions on Tuesdays, but we will always answer questions in the YouTube chat. So hit that like button, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out, because we're going to do this every single lunch hour on Wednesday. Plenty more to get to. We'll talk to you folks later.